Earlier this month, I did a solo trip up to the White River, which we normally like, but it was a dud. This time we drove late one day up, got here about 7 o'clock at the top of Lake Avery, had a decent little dinner quickly before the sun started to set. The dogs were happy to be out of the car and on the ground. There's where we had our little dinner and had to spend a nice night. Got up the next morning, hoped to fish Lake Avery again, but it was a dud again too, unfortunately. There's no dipples going on out there. So Sue and the dogs drove me down to the lower part of the Sleepy Cat easement where I got out and did a walk down this ugly bank down the river. Waiting there, you can wait about 100 feet, and then you get stuck with this undergrowth, which is absolutely awful this year because of the rains we've had. It reminded me of Humphrey Bogart going through the jungle in that movie, The African Queen. Where this clip was taken, I've now walked about a half a mile down the stream and waded across it once, which was murderous. That's a little fly. I tried all the way down. Didn't have a single strike. It was a mess. Just wasted all that time. So I swapped to a deep nymph rig and started using that as I worked my way back upstream. Finally had a little success where we got started down below and eased my way back up until I found a stretch of riffle water that was probably a foot to 2 feet deep at its upper end and started catching fish. As you might suspect, the White River is known for its whitefish, and that's what I started hooking mostly. But then we got into some nice rainbows. A couple of them were really good sized, and they pretty much alternated with whitefish, which were occupying the same depth and speed of water. So a couple of these early rainbows were in the 18-inch range, and they were big, fat, and happy. Then there's one coming up. There's going to be a clip coming up shortly that is a fish that's somewhere over 20 to 24 inches long, and I did not land it. It released too easily. But I did keep working this riffle probably for an hour or so. Fish finally really got tired of looking at my flies, and changing them didn't seem to do much better. So I made the unpleasant walk back across this river eventually and worked my way up to the entry area where we could get out of the water and do something different. The results were good, though. I must have released at least a handful of fish that were 16 to 18 inches in length, and like I said up above, completely misplayed or just plain lost the 20-incher. Sue was kind enough to pick me up. So we drove our way up to the Bel Air State Wildlife Area where we had a nice lunch, and I took the dogs downstream to do a little fishing on the South Fork. And I'll have to admit, the South Fork might even have been better than the main stem where I was this morning. The first cast I made at one of the few spots we can get on the water here because of the undergrowth and the bankside growth, hooked an awfully nice rainbow. The rainbows here are somewhat different colored. You don't get that rainbow coloration that you do on many of the other rivers. But it was interesting to find fish as large as these on a stream that's unweightable, but only flowing at about 120 cubes. On the next little piece of structure, first fish I hooked was another 16-incher that took off like a steelhead downstream. Fortunately, he stopped and I was able to get him back up. But after another couple of fish that were in that same length, I finally caught a smaller one. You'll see in a second. This one's about 16. The last one's about a foot long. But they were all fun, and it was fun to get on the water, even though I could only do it in about 5 places over a half mile of wading. So after that, we pretty much called it a day. It was these two places, the South Fork and the main stem, were darn good fishing this time around. At the end of a fairly decent fishing day, we headed back to camp again at the top of Avery Lake. Had a nice dinner of sushi for a change. Sue built a fire, and we stood around and watched it for a while. The weather was good again that night. We love this camping on top of Avery. There's tons of room for all kinds of people, and we have lots of privacy every time we're here. So next morning I got up and opted not to wade across the main stem again. It's just too dangerous right now. Fished a few pocket water places here and there, and pretty much called it a day after that. But it was a good trip overall. We'll be back next year for sure. I don't know where we're headed shortly, but it'll be somewhere fun.